As you see, we did add some extra chairs, so if you're just walking in, there's still a lot of chairs over here on this side and over there on the right-hand side. But I'm very pleased with the turnout, ladies and gentlemen. I was a little bit worried, as it is a beautiful day out there. But I'm glad you're all in here, because you're in for a real treat, let me tell you. For those of you who cruised with us before, you know that we do pay a lot of attention to our Beyond the Podium program, which is basically our enrichment program here. And we truly find professionals from all over the world, and we invite them to come on the ship to be a guest speaker. Now for this cruise, we have found a true professional, ladies and gentlemen, who will talk to you a little bit more about New Orleans and all of the music happenings there. And ladies and gentlemen, without any further ado, please welcome Mr. Bill. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Nice to be here with all of you, and nice to see so many great faces. Let me ask a quick question. How many people here have been to New Orleans before? A lot of you. Okay, that's fantastic. Those of you who have been here, just a quick question. If you could sum up a description of New Orleans in just a few words, what would you say?
Rowdy.
Eclectic. Oh, great. Yeah, it is. What else?
Colorful.
Colorful? What is it? Party! Oh, I'm going to stand by these people now. These are my new best friends over here. Any other thoughts?
Food.
Food. Oh, food. Oh, now I'm with you. Okay, fantastic. Right, and there's so many ways to describe what we see. Is there's a lot of different descriptions because it's so unique. It's different than probably any other city in the United States, maybe even in the world. Let me, and by the way, I have to say, first time I went there, I saw so many different things, so many aspects. And it wasn't until I had a chance to spend some time at Tulane University that I really got a feel for what the city is like and the people. Let me ask, is there anyone from New Orleans here? Anyone here? No? Okay. Because it's interesting, you can often tell where people are from by the way they pronounce it. For example, a lot of people from the north will pronounce it New Orleans. People from the south will call it New Orleans.
No.
However, if you're from the city, and especially if you're a Cajun, it becomes one word. You know what that word is?
New Orleans.
New Orleans, absolutely it is. All from New Orleans. And I really love the Cajun people. They have they're just their own personalities, their own way of talking. And it's almost like hooked on phonics, because often they'll write the same way that they talk. Here's an example of what you might see a conversation. Now, if this sounds strange or looks strange to you, let me interpret how you might hear this conversation. We'll go something like this. Ember, ducks. Ember not ducks. Oh, yes they are. See them itty bitty wings? Wobby. Them are ducks. So that's your lesson in Cajun for today. So, just a little bit about me. I'd like to introduce myself a little bit more. Again, my name is Bill Cashel. I'm a former quartet trainer. I still teach part-time at Community College in Omaha, Nebraska, which is where I'm from. I'm also an author and a health coach, and sometimes I use hypnosis with that. I think the mind and body are so tied together, but more than anything on this cruise, I'm a cruise junkie. Yeah, a lot of people here. I love that. And I love music. I have to admit, at one time, I was an aspiring musician. I had a piano, I had a guitar, and when I'd sing in the car, I sounded a lot like Elvis, but a whole lot like Ricky Nelson. And it wasn't until I actually got a tape recorder I found out that I didn't sound very good at all. And then I learned that I really wasn't that good of a musician, so I became a music appreciation person. So we're headed to New Orleans. It's a home of music, of jazz, and I hope you all love that. I'll try not to block your view, hopefully to see the side. So New Orleans is unlike any other place, and the real heartbeat of New Orleans is the jazz, the music. It's the place where it's been. And it's unique because the sound, jazz, was created in New Orleans. And part of the reason it's so unique is because more than any other city, it's really a melting pot of all different nationalities. Now, a brief review of where it all started. It all started with the Indians, or Native Americans, who lived in that area before anyone ever visited. The first settlers, or the first people visiting, were the Spanish when they discovered this area. Then in 1682, the French took control, and you can see in the middle they developed an area they called Louisiana. And then they actually formed their own capital of their area there, which we call New Orleans. Along the way, they brought along a lot of other settlers as well. There were Irish, there were French, there were, of course, a lot of people from all around the world came to settle in here, so it became really unique. One of the things they also did was bring in slaves to help build the city, so there was a lot of ethnic backgrounds that went into this. In 1762, the Spanish took control again, but didn't last long. 1800, French had it back again, and probably more than any other city has such a French influence. Then, in 1803, of course, Andrew Jackson made the real estate deal of the century when he made the Louisiana Purchase, and it became America. Now, New Orleans, it's if you're not familiar with, you haven't been there, it's actually winding up the river about 100 miles from the mouth of the river. And it's kind of an unusual place in some ways, but in other ways it may be the perfect place. There are two great rivers that flow out of North America. One is the St. Lawrence Seaway, the other is the Mississippi. So it seemed only natural for shipping that there would be a great city developed somewhere on the Mississippi so they could bring supplies in and ship them out. This became the place that what they found was that this bend in the river, there was a levee that was built up, or it was raised up a little higher. So they said, this is a great place to build a city. Now, logistically, it was a perfect place. Geographically, it was a terrible place because it was on a ridge, as we see right there when they first planned it out. But then when you're just building a small town or a little area, that's all you need. But what you find is behind that, it actually sloped down to where it's actually below sea level. And then just north of there is Lake Pontchartrain. So here, as the city developed more and more, and there was swampland back there, but as they developed more and more, they had a city that was below sea level. And of course, we know it's in the path of hurricanes. We saw what happened with Katrina and all the damage it had. So it was the perfect place to build a city and not build a city, but it was built there and established there. And it brought in settlers from all over the world. It became, as I said, more of a melting place than any place else. What you found was there were a lot of slaves that were there. There were also what they called free people of color, because Haiti had recently had its independence, so a lot of them would move there. And you also had the French people who were born there, called French Creole. Also had the Cajuns, which were primarily the French Canadians that had moved down there. We had the Spanish, we had the Italians, there were Irish, and probably less influence initially than from the English than any place else in the country. So it became a real unique place. The one common bond, I think, for all of them that came together was the music of New Orleans, and that is the place. In fact, it is so strong in 1994, this is something I've never seen before. Congress created what they call an intangible national park, and it's not really in the sense of place, but it's more of a state of mind. Now, there actually is a place with a park, Louis Armstrong Park in New Orleans, and it's a place where you can actually go, and one of the highlights of there, when you go there, you're going to find something called Congo Square. Now, the significance of Congo Square, in the 1700s, when there were a lot of slaves, dancing was banned for slaves all throughout the South except New Orleans. And what New Orleans said was, we're going to designate one place, because they were concerned with a lot of slaves getting together. There were such great numbers, they could be an uprising. So they said, what we'll do is we'll have a place for them to go. And in a sense, regulate or control it or give them that. So every Sunday afternoon, all the slaves would come to Congo Square, and there would be hundreds of them. They'd be dancing there all afternoon. They'd be dancing, playing the drums, basically carrying on all the traditions they had brought from the Caribbean islands and from Africa. This was their place to get together. And in some ways, this was kind of the start of the music and some of the traditions that carried on in what we now know as jazz. In the 1700s, some of the slaves would run away. And when they would run away, they would often end up with the Native Americans, who had one common enemy. Of course, that was the white people. Sometimes they would even attack them. So it was banned for black people, people of color, to wear any feathers or headdresses like that. Now, later on, after slavery was abolished, of course, that came back into view. And of course, we know that dressing up is very common for especially things like Mardi Gras parade and so forth. And to this day, it's still carried on the tradition that's been going on for hundreds of years. And the dancing in Congo Square, Tulane University, along with a lot of other people, they'll sponsor a dance. People will come there to dance, they'll dress up. So it's quite a place, a historic place, something that a lot of people call sacred ground. If you go just a little farther over the edge of the park, you'll find something called Perseverance Hall number 4. Now, this was built around 1812. It's the second oldest, and if you look at the top, there's a Masonic symbol. Second oldest Masonic temple in the Missouri Valley area. And in this time, they had these societies. And basically what they were burial societies. And you would buy into these in a sense, you would pay into these. And what it was really for, there were 3 contracts that you had to have at that time. The first one was for a gravesite to be buried. You see, one of the things you find with most of New Orleans is that there's very little that can be used for burial in the ground because it's such a high water table. And so what you'll find is most of the cemeteries are above ground. So this would be pretty costly. When someone passed away, you couldn't just put them in a pine box and say, there you go. So that was the first contract they had to have. The second one was with a physician or a pharmacist. The third one was with a brass band. The brass bands were so important back then for so many things. Now, when we talk about this society, this was not unusual, the one we saw there. For example, in the 1800s, there were somewhere between 200 and 500 of these societies, burial societies, that were around. Now you figure all of the parades, all the funerals, all the celebrations were always on Sunday. So you can imagine when people were having parades, and bands and so forth, the number of bands. So what this created was a huge need for brass bands, and a huge number of brass bands became prevalent. And this is where the great musicians, in a sense, attribute all of their presence to, was the origination of the brass band that was down here. You can see some of the things. Here's one of the advertisements from our turn of the century, about 1900. Allen's Brass Band. Some of the things, all occasions, funerals, picnics, and parades. You notice the first thing on there is funerals. And this is really interesting because it's one of the traditions in New Orleans is to have the band at the funeral. And it's really fascinating the way they do it. The tradition, and some of their variations, but the tradition is it's very solemn inside, but when they bring the casket out, then they start with a snare drum. And it brings everybody to attention, just like a military. And then they start to beat the bass. Boom, 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 boom. And it's almost like the heartbeat of the whole group has taken the place of a loved one that's gone. And then the horns come, and they carry them off just like Gabriel has arrived. Now, one of the things that they will do, and this is by tradition, you'll see some variations, is the band will then lead the family, all the mourners, all the people from the church to the burial site. This is often called the first line. One of the things that's become a traditional, and that is the fact that this goes back to the Congo Square, where it was all about the music of dancing and so forth. So what they have afterwards is something called the second line. Often this is after when the band leaves the burial site, then they will continue to play, and often the music will change. It will become a bit more upbeat. And basically what it is an invitation for the people of New Orleans to come join in the parade. Now, every parade is an invitation in New Orleans. What they have, what they call the second line, where the tradition is, when you see a parade, you watch it go by, but it's not like other places where you just watch it and it's over. You watch it go by and then you join in. You become what's called the second line. So again, that's tradition as well at the funeral. So here's an example of this. Here is a funeral. You'll see a shift from the beginning to the second line. want to get up and dance right now, doesn't it? And that's the way they treated it down there. And so that's what's so one of the things that's so wonderful in those traditions. So if you see a band going by, and there's a good chance you will because they happen so often down there, don't be shy about following, become part of this second line.